Can I take this opportunity to express my opinion?
Yes.
Okay. First, we firmly oppose groundless calumny against China's religious policy. China is a multi-religious country. Protection of religious freedom is the basic national policy of China. Chinese citizens can freely choose and practice their belief. It is protected by law. You can find it in Chinese constitution. I can give you some statistics to prove my opinion. There are more than 100 million religious people in China, and over 5,500 religious groups conduct activities in China. The Chinese government inputs 30 million yuan per year to build and repair religious places, such as mosques, temples, and churches. So I think it's convincing that religious freedom is protected in China. But however, 邪教 is not the same thing. 邪教, they distort the doctrine and make use of people's religious belief to carry out illegal activities. Chinese authority punishing these criminals according to law. And our purpose is to better protect normal activities and the right to religious belief. I believe in the world there is no government could allow criminal crimes and the guide of religion. So that's opinion. That's my opinion.
Thank you. Maybe I missed it. Did you present yourself before?
What?
Where are you, please?
I'm with Chinese government.
Okay.
I'm from Beijing.
Okay, thank you. So I will give the floor to Mr. Intervene to answer you.
Thank you. I believe it's an important contribution, as it was clarified by one of the speakers, but I want to clarify it myself. We do not pretend to give lessons to China. We are very well aware that even in the West, there are problems about religious liberty. Our institutions are not perfect, and particularly groups labeled as cults have been discriminated and persecuted for many years in European countries. There is a debate even in United States in these very days, because television series are questioning why incidents such as the one in Waco, really the police handled the situation according to the law. So I don't believe we are in a position to say we are the good countries, some other countries are bad. That's completely foreign to our attitude and certainly to my attitude. And I'm very grateful to the Chinese authorities for having invited me twice in 2017 and also in previous years to China to discuss these issues with them. So I believe dialogue is very important. And so we should make an effort to understand how the Chinese system operates and what are the reasons behind Chinese attitudes. On the other hand, dialogue always goes both ways. So we listen with respect to the position of the Chinese authorities, but when we were kindly invited to China, we also presented our different point of view. So I believe a key comment in your presentation is that Xie Jiao distort the doctrines. Now, distorting the doctrines in our Western European or American legal system is not a crime. And again, I say our system is not perfect. But distorting the doctrines cannot be, in our opinion, be constructed of a crime, because what is a distorted doctrine for one people is the truth for the next person. And so we absolutely agree that people who commit crime, people who kill people, people who abuse women or children, they should be punished. Our concern, however, with your Article 300 of Chinese Criminal Code and with the interpretation of Article 300 in January 2017 by the Chinese Supreme Court and the Chinese Supreme Procuratorate, is that in the definition of criminal activities by Xie Jiao, there are crimes such as spreading superstition or preaching false doctrines. And that is exactly the point where we do not agree, because how you define a superstition, how you define a true doctrine or a false doctrine. Again, what for me is a true doctrine, perhaps for you is a false doctrine. What for you is a true doctrine, perhaps for me is a false doctrine. So we should surely continue this dialogue, and as we try to understand the rationale for the Chinese attitudes against Xie Jiao, and as I said, I understand that dates back to the Ming period. It's not new. It's a constant in Chinese history. I believe the Chinese side should also try to understand the different points of view and the fact that international convention doesn't really allow for discriminating against religious groups for what they believe. False teaching, distorted teachings, heterodox teaching. So, of course, common crimes should be punished, but nobody should be persecuted for simply believing something other people do not agree with. But again, I thank you for your intervention, and I hope that the dialogue can be continued during the next years.
Chinese.
Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm a staff from Chinese Association for International Understanding. Just want to ask a question that have you ever gone to China and get some first-hand materials about these cases that related to the Church of Almighty God? Why I asked this question, because that, to be honest, there are too many rumors and fake stories on the internet today all over the world. You know, even though the stories are told by the people that experienced by himself, the story might not be the entire truth. And in the video, only the adherents of Almighty God were interviewed, but we didn't get any words from the Chinese officers and the police. And I think we should interview one side and should interview the other side, and that can give us the entire truth. And I also noted that the interviewees in the video, they dressed well, they looked, their skin, the color of their skin looked light yellow, and they looked, they are not working on the land, but as I know that that many adherents in China of the Almighty God, then they are usually Chinese farmers. So I think that I suggest you to prepare a trip to China and go and see and do some real investigations or surveys on the issues that you talked about.
Thank you for your kind question. That's exactly what we did. Here you see a report published by KK News, that's a government agency, about my trip to China.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent 8 days in Henan with the 610 Office of the Police. I was invited by the Chinese Anti-Cult Association with another 3 American scholars, and we toured all Henan. Unfortunately, we could not meet with actual members of the Church of Almighty God. That was not allowed by the Chinese authorities. But in all the different cities we visited, we met police officers and we met former members of the Church of Almighty God, which had been reformed in labor camps, and told to us their stories. So that's exactly what we did. I did my study of the Church of Almighty God is particular of the crimes ascribed to the Church of Almighty God is completely based on documents I received from Chinese authorities. I didn't receive any documents on the McDonald's murder, for instance, by the Church of Almighty God. They don't have any documents about it. It was done by a different group. You can find there my article on the McDonald's murder, all the documents quoted there, documents I received from the Chinese authorities. So I thank you for your suggestion. It makes a lot of sense. And that's exactly what we did. We went to China, we interviewed police officers, we interviewed former members of the Church of Almighty God. Some of them are reformed and today are members of the Communist Party. We interviewed the relatives of members of the Church of Almighty God who are members of the Chinese Communist Party and very much against the Church of Almighty God. You are perfectly right. That's the homework scholars should do. And that's exactly what we did. But on the other hand, we also interviewed members of the Church of Almighty God in Korea, in Europe, in the United States. We would have loved to do this in China, but it's underground organization, we were not allowed. So I believe we did our homework. One of the results of our homework, and your last observation is very interesting, it's that the reports in some early Chinese studies that the average member of the Church of Almighty God is a peasant, these reports are inaccurate. Statistically, the majority of the members of the Church of Almighty God are middle class. So it's not surprising that they don't look like peasants, because they are not peasants. That was reported in some of the very early studies of the Church of Almighty God written 6-7 years ago. But one of the interesting results of our studies, that's basically a mistake. Most members of the Church of Almighty God are middle class. They are not farmers.
Yeah, I mean, next time maybe you should put some officers' words in the video, and we hear from different sides, and we can totally know the entire truth from both sides.
That's very good, but of course this is an event presenting our point of view. When I went to an event in China, You see the picture, that was an event in Zhengzhou about the Church of Almighty God. I saw videos by the government against the Church of Almighty God. I didn't see any video in favor of the Church of Almighty God. I was not scandalized, that's normal. I go to an event organized by the government in China for criticizing the Church of Almighty God. They don't expect that they offer me a point of view criticizing the government. So that's more or less normal. If we proceed, I wanted to say something.
No, that is the paradox. Then you are invited in the Chinese government is inviting you. They give only their version. So it's strange that you are now surprised that it's like another version. But the normal dealing is that everybody sits together and talks. But we cannot only expect that our truth is right. The dialogue usually exposes perhaps both sides in some ways. That there are some things, but the dialogue is the essential. And as the scholars, because Massimo talks not only about himself, but in the photo, for instance, you see Gordon Melton, well-known American scholar, who went to China, we don't know how many times. He spent years. And now he has different opinions, and he is more on our side. So it's clearly, there are things that is to be discovered. It just saying that everything is fine is not enough, because the facts, because when there is some accusation, it should be facts, but on the both sides, it's not only on one side. We cannot expect only the members of Almighty God to provide some proofs. I saw, me personally, I saw the people who are suffering from the traumas of the torture. I saw myself. And they're seeking healing because that is, people, they're damaged. And it's not coming just like this because they just decided to be bad people. So it's very complicated. It's on the both sides, it's complicated. And it's dialogue, as I say, is the best thing to do.
Just after I give you the floor, just to be very understand that this side event is not a criticize, it's not an attack, it's the way to open the dialogues, and we are here to open the dialogue and to find solution. So now I give you the floor.
Okay. Sir, as I know, the Chinese judicial officers, including policemen, prosecutor, and judges, they will be responsible for their duty behaviors for life according to the law. So, if they were found to have any wrongdoings, even when they retire, they will be punished by the law. So it obvious that they will not do illegal things such as torture their criminal suspect, beat them, or be rude to their suspect relatives. So I don't know the source of their video, but for me, I think it's hard to believe. Yes, this is my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. That gives me the opportunity to insist on the dialogue. Here you see this man is Professor Gordon Melton, a very well-known scholar from Baylor University in Texas. And he, as lecturer to Security University, the University of the Police in Beijing, discussing the Church of Almighty God. One of the results is this Monday, this week, Professor Shang-Chun Li, I don't know if my pronunciation is right, of Security University in Beijing, arrived in Texas a few days ago at Baylor University to train for 6 months under Professor Melton. So this dialogue is continuing. We go to China, professor from the Security University, University of the Police are going to United States for training and discussion. Now, of course, there are in China laws against torture. I'm an Italian. There are these laws also in Italy, but recently 6 policemen were sentenced to heavy jail penalties in Italy for torturing suspects. So it happens all over the world. Of course, there are laws against torture and abuse, but torture and abuse may happen. It happens in the United States, it happens in Europe. I will not exclude that it may happen also in China. Again, it's important that you understand we are not here to distinguish between good countries and bad countries. These abuses also exist in the United States and in Europe, but we listen to evidence to people who claim to have been tortured in China, and we believe their voices deserve to be heard. As for the laws, that's exactly the problem, and that's what makes this dialogue fruitful and interesting. Of course, the members of the Church of Almighty God are prosecuted according to the law, but most of them are sentenced, and there are documents about it. They are sentenced under Article 300 of the Chinese Criminal Code, and we believe that Article 300 is wrong. It's a law incriminating activities on behalf of certain religions labeled as Xiejia. And it's interesting, if you study Article 300, for instance, there is a study by Professor James Richardson. He's an eminent scholar of law, and that he is an eminent scholar of law has been recognized by the Chinese authorities. They have invited him repeatedly to lecture in China, including in the Security University in Beijing, and he studied Article 300 and concluded Article 300 punishes people simply for being active or doing missionary activities on behalf of certain religions or cults, okay, Xiejia. And that's something we do not agree with. Again, if people steal, murder, abuse children, abuse women, they should be punished. But if people simply say, we believe that a certain woman is a mighty God, or we believe in UFOs, that should be free. Nobody should be punished because of his or her belief. We understand that's a cultural difference, that the Xiejia legislation exists in China since the 18th century. It's not been invented by recent authorities, but that's a point of disagreement we should frankly and sincerely discuss.
I just would like to underline that this meeting is not about is proving or discussing about the torture. Torture is one of the persecution's elements, because if you see the title of the event is clearly said is religious freedom and ethical persecution in China. Because there is intolerance, there is discrimination, there is persecution, and then it might be torture. So we are not trying to prove that we are really the gods, that we know and that we have made it. It will be too much. What we're discussing here, we're discussing persecution. And persecution, I believe, it's clearly the law, the list of the groups that they are Xinjiang. So it's clear there is a persecution. That's all we say. The rest is not up to us, because torture is a very serious crime, and it's different. It's covered by the Convention on Persecution, and there are different mechanisms to do it. It's not that's what we do here. Here it's a very simple thing. We try to say and to prove with the arguments that the members of the Church of Almighty God, they are persecuted or discriminated against. This is higher, is persecution. So they cannot freely express their beliefs in China. That's it. So that's a very simple conclusion. They cannot, and you have to agree that they cannot, because the Chinese government is perceiving them as something bad. That's, I believe, mainly the meeting is about it, and we should stay in the frame of this without going really very far and have a very, very difficult discussion that we are not entitled to have. Thank you.
Thank you.
Open you.
do you know what the adherent of Almighty God do to the public, to the Chinese public on earth? Because I know they are involved in many issues of crime like fraud and suicide. I think there are a few words about this crime. I think I want you to tell me more about this.
Yes, as I said, we were invited to China for a week-long tour of Henan, talking with police officers, some of them quite high-placed police officers. And after we went to Henan, we digested the material we collected in Henan in June 2017. We were invited for a second seminar in September in Hong Kong, again with high-placed Chinese police officers in charge of dealing with Xie Zhao, the so-called Office 610, came to his conference. So, crimes, it's very interesting. I mean, I have studied violence connected to religion for 30 years. So we asked the Chinese side, the police, to provide documents about these crimes. And we were provided with a number of documents on some crimes. On other crimes, we were told there are no documents, because they are too old, the documents have disappeared, or all the procedure was not done in writing. So, very shortly, there are 4 main incidents we have received documents about. Number 1, the McDonald's murder. 2014 in Zhaojuan, you will find my study on the table. And I've recently discussed with Chinese scholars, members of CCP, including this Professor Zhang is now studying in Texas, and he basically agrees my article is correct. It was a different group who used the name Almighty God, but recognized a different Almighty God, not the same person this group recognizes as Almighty God. Number 2, there was the case of a boy whose eyes were gouged out in Shaanxi, and documents from Chinese sources, because Almighty God said we have nothing to do, so they don't have documents about it, were studied by another scholar who was invited to both trips to China, Professor Holly Fogg. She teaches in Washington State in the US. Again, you find there an article she wrote, and the Chinese police closed the investigation by saying the boy's eyes were gouged out by the boy's aunt, who later committed suicide. She's not a member of the Church of Almighty God. And only after 1 year, after the McDonald's case, some Chinese media started involving the Church of Almighty God. But that's not what the documents say. Case number 3, riots in 2012 about the prediction of the end of the world in 2012. Yes, there were riots in China. Yes, many Chinese believe the so-called Maya prophecy that the world will end in 2012. Perhaps in these riots there were some members of the Church of Almighty God, but the Church of Almighty God as an organization issued documents that this belief was false. And that makes sense, as I know the theology of the Church of Almighty God. I've studied it quite in depth. The Church of Almighty God does not believe in the end of the world. In 2012 or in any other date, it believes the world will be transformed in a better world, but will not be destroyed. And also they believe that this transformation of the world can only take place after the person they recognize as Almighty God will have completely dismission, and As Mr. Ru mentioned it, even Emily Duck, she's an Australian scholar. She doesn't like the Church of Almighty God, but in her book about the Church of Almighty God, she clarifies that those members who spread the 1012 prophecies were disapproved by the leaders of the Church of Almighty God. Some of them were excommunicated, were expelled. Number 4, in 2002, 16 years ago, some pastors of a Christian church called the China Gospel Fellowship claimed to have been kidnapped by Church of Almighty God for purposes of conversion. Here the case is very interesting because the Chinese authorities never opened an investigation. There is no police investigation, there is no court case, and we have to believe these pastors and the lay leaders of the China Gospel Fellowship, but their story is very not persuasive. And again, you will find an issue of a scholarly journal with an article I wrote based on the existing documents, which are not police documents because police never investigate this case, are documents by this Christian group, and these documents are not very convincing. Very good for a novel. Actually, 2 novels were written in this case, but novels are one case and the reality is something different. I know there are other accusations, you can find them even in Wikipedia very easily, but about these other 2-3 incidents, which are very old, date back to 20 years ago, I asked personally the Chinese authorities to provide documents, and they told me there are no documents left, so I cannot say anything fall under the category of rumors, because when there are no documents, they are rumors, they are not fact.
Thank you. Yes, it's time to finish now. We go over more than 40 minutes. So that's very good to have this question, this exchange, because it shows the purpose of this side event, which is dialogue. And for sure, after, we can continue this dialogue. So thank you.